The wind hit 100 miles per hour around 3 a.m. on February 4, 1884, strong enough to tear roofs off buildings, and Ingrid Bergström woke in her earth-bermed cabin to the sound of destruction happening across Dakota Territory, while her own tiny structure sat silent and protected under tons of packed earth that absorbed the violence without transmitting it inside. She was 31 years old, alone in 10 feet by 12 feet of living space, surrounded on 3 sides by earth piled to the roofline. And she was about to leave her warm, protected cabin to rescue neighbors whose conventional structures were being destroyed by wind that couldn't touch her earth-fortified walls. 8 months earlier, nobody had believed this moment was possible. Ingrid Bergström arrived in Dakota Territory in May 1883 from Sweden via Minnesota, one of the Scandinavian immigrants who brought European building knowledge to American frontier. She'd worked 3 years in Minneapolis saving money. By spring 1883, she had $65 and wanted her own land. Ingrid filed claim on 80 acres near what would become Jamestown, open prairie with good soil but no timber except along distant creek. Land was cheap because building materials were expensive to transport. Most settlers built sod houses using prairie earth since wood was scarce and costly. Ingrid wanted a log cabin, not sod house, but hauling logs from the creek area would be expensive. She had limited money and no help. She needed a design that minimized log requirements while maximizing insulation for Dakota winters she knew would be brutal. In Sweden, Ingrid's grandfather had built root cellars and food storage structures using earth-berming techniques, piling earth against walls to create insulation and protection. The earth mass absorbed temperature swings, protected from wind, and provided thermal stability that exposed walls couldn't achieve. Ingrid's idea was radical: build a tiny log cabin, just 10 by 12 feet to minimize wood required, but pile earth against 3 walls up to the roofline, leaving only the front, south-facing wall exposed for door and windows. The earth-bermed 3 walls would provide massive insulation. The exposed front wall would provide light and access. The structure would look like a grassy hill or mound with a cabin front sticking out, like someone had built a cabin and then buried 3/4 of it under earth. The exposed portion would be normal log construction. The buried portions would be logs protected by tar paper and covered with tons of packed earth. When Ingrid explained this plan to her neighbor Peter Larsson, also Swedish but settled longer, his reaction was immediate horror. "Ingrid, you're planning to bury 3 walls of your cabin under earth? That's insane. The earth will rot the logs. Moisture will seep through and flood your cabin. The weight of the earth will crush the structure. You're creating a death trap that will collapse or rot or flood." In Sweden, earth-bermed structures last decades if built properly. I'll waterproof with tar paper, create drainage, build walls strong enough to support earth weight. The technique is proven. I'm just applying it to a tiny log cabin instead of a sod structure. But Ingrid, even if the structure somehow doesn't collapse, which it will, what's the point? You're building a cabin so small it's barely livable, then burying most of it under dirt. You'll be living in a dark burrow, half underground. It's not civilized, it's not proper. It's Swedish stubbornness applied wrong. The earth provides insulation no wooden wall can match. 3 bermed walls mean minimal heat loss, and 10 by 12 feet is adequate for one person living efficiently. Peter shook his head with genuine concern. "Even ignoring the structural danger and the moisture problems, people will judge you. A woman living alone in a tiny earth-covered structure? It looks like you've given up on civilization and retreated into a hole in the ground. Ingrid, save longer, buy more logs. Build a normal cabin that doesn't make you look desperate." But Ingrid had calculated everything. She bought materials, 18 logs for walls, 10 by 12 footprint plus 1 exposed front wall meant far fewer logs than normal cabins. Tar paper for waterproofing, $4. Boards for door and window frames, minimal interior finishing. Total materials, $38, leaving $27 for supplies and contingency. Labor would be intense but free. Ingrid would excavate and pile the earth herself. Construction began June 1883. Ingrid's first step was excavation. She dug back into a slight natural rise in the prairie, creating a flat building platform with earth banking up behind and on both sides. The excavation was positioned so the front, south-facing, would be exposed, while back and sides would have earth banked against them. The excavation work took 3 weeks of intensive labor. Ingrid used a spade and wheelbarrow, moving earth methodically. She dug back approximately 5 feet into the natural rise, creating a platform and leaving earth walls on 3 sides that would later be packed against her cabin walls. The excavated dirt was piled nearby. She'd use it later for Berming. Then Ingrid built her log cabin on the platform, 10 by 12 feet, conventional log construction, walls rising 7 feet. She built carefully. The 3 walls that would be earth-bermed had to support the weight of packed earth, so Ingrid used heavy logs, 10 to 12 inches diameter, and tight construction with extra corner bracing. The corner joints were particularly important. Ingrid used saddle notch joinery, cutting each log to interlock tightly with perpendicular logs. She added extra diagonal bracing at each corner where bermed walls met. Wooden supports angled from foundation to roofline, creating triangular bracing that would help walls resist inward pressure from earth weight. The roof construction was also critical. Ingrid built a simple gable roof with gentle slope. She wanted minimal height to reduce wind exposure, and the earth berms would come nearly to the roofline. She used light rafters and board and batten roofing rather than shingles, keeping weight minimal since the roof would have earth berms supporting it from 3 sides. Critically, before piling earth, Ingrid wrapped the 3 exterior walls, back and both sides, in tar paper, multiple layers, sealed carefully, creating waterproof barrier between logs and earth. She bought 4 rolls of tar paper at $1 each. Expensive, but essential. She wrapped each log completely, overlapped seams by 6 inches, sealed joints with additional tar. The tar paper application took a full week. Ingrid worked meticulously, ensuring complete coverage with no gaps where moisture could penetrate. She brought the tar paper from foundation level up over the tops of the wall logs and onto the roof edge, creating continuous waterproof envelope. Ingrid also created drainage, the most critical element everyone who criticized her design failed to understand. She dug trenches at the base of all 3 bermed walls, shallow channels 6 inches deep, 8 inches wide, filled with rocks and leading water away downslope. Any moisture percolating down through the earth berms would hit these drainage channels and be carried away before reaching the tar-papered walls. Additionally, Ingrid graded the earth berms themselves to shed water. The berms would slope away from the cabin at the top, directing rainfall down the outer slopes rather than against the walls. The earth immediately against the tar paper would be packed clay-rich soil that sheds water, while the outer berm layers would be regular soil and sod. Then came the massive physical work, piling earth against the 3 wrapped walls. This was where Ingrid's plan became brutally labor-intensive, but essentially free. The earth was already there from excavation plus prairie sod, costing nothing but Ingrid's effort. She started with the back wall. Using the wheelbarrow, Ingrid transported earth from her excavation pile and packed it against the tar-papered back wall. She worked in layers, 6 inches of earth packed firmly, then another 6 inches, building up gradually. She tamped each layer with a wooden tool, ensuring dense packing that would support itself and resist settling. The back wall berming took 2 weeks. By the time Ingrid finished, the entire back wall was buried under a berm, rising 7 feet high to the roofline, extending back approximately 5 feet from the cabin and sloping gently to shed water. From behind, the cabin completely disappeared. just a grassy mound with a roof peak visible at the top. The side walls required similar work. Ingrid bermed each side wall from the back corner forward, creating earth mounds flanking the cabin. The side berms extended about 12 feet forward, the full cabin depth, rising 7 feet high against the walls, then sloping down toward the front where the exposed wall would remain clear. The total earth berming took 6 weeks of exhausting physical labor. Ingrid moved approximately 40 tons of earth, wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, layer by layer, creating the protective earth mass that would insulate and protect her cabin. The work destroyed her hands with blisters, strained her back, tested her endurance beyond anything she'd experienced, but earth was free, just labor, and Ingrid had more labor than money. By late September, the berming was complete. Ingrid planted prairie grass sod on the berm surfaces to prevent erosion and create a living roof effect on the portions of berm that rose above the cabin roofline. Within weeks, the sod took root, and the earth berms began to look like natural landscape features, grassy mounds flanking a small cabin front. The result looked bizarre, a tiny log cabin that appeared to be emerging from a grassy hill. The back of the structure was completely buried under earth. The sides were bermed with earth extending forward, creating angular mounds. Only the front wall was fully exposed, logs visible, door, 2 windows, normal cabin appearance, while the rest of the structure was surrounded by tons of packed earth. From behind, the structure looked like a natural hill with a peaked roof sticking out of the top. From the sides, it looked like earth mounds flanking a cabin front. From the front, it looked like a normal small cabin, until you realized the back and sides disappeared into earth rather than having exposed walls. Neighbors who saw the construction were split between mockery and alarm. "Bergstrom is burying her cabin alive," people said in the small settlement. "She's building a grave to live in. The earth will crush it or rot it or flood it within months." Sarah Mitchell, a homesteader's wife who'd been friendly, came to express concerns. "Ingrid, I've watched you pile earth against your cabin walls. That structure is buried on 3 sides under tons of dirt. This is the most dangerous construction I've ever seen. The earth weight will eventually crush those walls. Moisture will seep through and rot the logs. You'll wake up one day to your cabin collapsing around you or flooded with mud. Please remove the earth before it's too late." The logs are waterproofed with tar paper. Drainage prevents water accumulation. The wall construction is braced to support earth weight. This technique has been used in Europe for centuries. It's proven safe. But you're not building a root cellar or storage shed. You're planning to live in a structure that's mostly buried. That's not healthy, not safe, not civilized. Even if it doesn't collapse, you'll be living in darkness and dampness like an animal in a burrow. Ingrid, this is wrong. But Ingrid moved into her earth-bermed cabin in late September 1883. The immediate experience surprised her with how well everything functioned. The interior was darker than a fully exposed cabin. Only the front wall had windows, so light came from one direction. But the 2 windows provided adequate daylight during the day, and lanterns worked fine for evening. The space didn't feel cave-like or oppressive. It felt protected and secure. The moisture situation was perfect. The tar paper waterproofing and drainage system worked excellently. The interior walls were dry, no damp, no seepage, no rot signs. The earth outside and the wood inside remained separated by effective waterproof barrier. The temperature was remarkable. Even in late September, when exterior nights dropped to 40 degrees, the cabin interior stayed at 55 degrees with no heating. The earth mass surrounding 3 walls absorbed daytime warmth and released it slowly, creating thermal stability. The bermed walls didn't respond to exterior temperature swings. They maintained steady warmth from the earth mass. As October brought colder weather, Ingrid discovered the earth berming's true advantage. She lit a small fire in her stove for cooking and slight additional warmth. The cabin heated quickly. Only 120 square feet meant minimal volume. But more importantly, the three earth-bermed walls retained heat. Conventional cabins lost heat through all four walls. Ingrid's cabin only lost heat through the exposed front wall. The three bermed walls were insulated by tons of earth that didn't conduct temperature. November brought first serious cold, temperatures down to 10 degrees overnight. Ingrid's experience: cabin interior, 58 degrees with small fire. Conventional cabins, 45 to 50 degrees despite heavy fires. Ingrid was warmer using less wood because 3/4 of her cabin surface area was insulated by earth mass instead of exposed to cold air. December brought colder tests. Exterior temperatures reached -5 degrees. Ingrid maintained 56 to 60 degrees inside, using approximately 1/6 the firewood of conventional cabins. The earth berming was working better than even she'd anticipated. But Ingrid stayed quiet. She knew moderate cold wouldn't convince people who were certain her earth-bermed cabin was structurally dangerous and would collapse or flood. She needed extreme conditions to prove the design. The first extreme test came February 4, 1884. But it wasn't the temperature that tested structures, it was the wind. The blizzard started February 3rd as heavy snow and rising wind. By midnight it was brutal, temperature dropping to -32 degrees, snow heavy, but the truly deadly element was the wind. The wind increased through the night. By 2 a.m. February 4th, it was sustained at 80 miles per hour with gusts higher. By 3 a.m., it hit 100 miles per hour, wind strong enough to tear structures apart, demolish conventional construction, kill anyone exposed. Ingrid woke at 3 a.m. to silence inside her cabin, while outside she could hear destruction happening. The wind was hitting her cabin with catastrophic force, but inside she heard almost nothing. The earth berms surrounding three walls were absorbing the wind force. Tons of packed earth don't shake or vibrate from wind pressure. The bermed walls stood solid and silent while wind destroyed exposed structures. Ingrid's exposed front wall was taking direct wind hit and transmitted some force. She could hear wind screaming past her door and windows. But the wind couldn't get around to the sides or back. Those walls were protected by earth mass that made them invulnerable to wind. Half a mile away, Peter Larsen was experiencing catastrophe. Peter's cabin, 16 by 20 feet, well-built conventional construction, was being destroyed. The wind was so strong that it was tearing the roof off. The peaked roof, fully exposed to wind, caught tremendous force. Around 3:30 a.m., Peter heard cracking sounds. At 3:45, a section of roof tore away, leaving a 6-foot hole exposing the interior to blizzard conditions. Snow poured into Peter's cabin through the hole. Wind howled through the opening. Temperature inside dropped rapidly as the structure lost its weather seal. Peter's wife Anna and their 3 children were in immediate danger. The cabin was no longer shelter. It was a wind tunnel, with snow pouring through the destroyed roof. A quarter mile in another direction, Sarah Mitchell's cabin was suffering similar damage. The wind had torn 2 windows out of their frames. Not just broken glass, but entire window frames ripped away, leaving large openings. Her cabin was exposed to the storm, no longer weatherproof, temperature dropping to lethal levels. Across Dakota Territory, conventional cabins were being destroyed, not by cold, but by wind. Peaked roofs caught wind force and tore away. Large exposed wall surfaces took direct hits and failed. Structures built entirely above ground with 4 exposed walls had no protection from sustained 100-mile-per-hour wind. Ingrid stood in her earth-bermed cabin at 4 a.m., listening to the destruction outside while her own structure sat silent and unmoved. And she realized something crucial. Her cabin was so stable, so protected, that she could actually leave it safely to help others. The earth berms made her cabin into a fortress. The wind couldn't damage what it couldn't reach. 3 walls were protected by tons of earth. The exposed front wall was taking wind hit, but was small enough, just 10 feet wide, that it presented minimal surface for wind to attack. The structure wasn't going to fail. Ingrid made a decision that would have been suicidal from any conventional cabin. She was going out into the blizzard to rescue neighbors whose structures were being destroyed. She dressed in every piece of warm clothing she owned, wrapped her face, and opened her door against the wind force. The wind tried to tear the door from her hands, but Ingrid was strong from months of physical labor building her cabin. She forced herself outside. The journey to Peter Larsen's cabin, normally 5-minute walk, became a nightmare crawl through 100-mile-per-hour wind. Ingrid couldn't stand upright. The wind knocked her down when she tried. She crawled through waist-deep snow, navigating by memory and occasional visibility when snow cleared briefly. She reached Peter's cabin and found disaster. Part of the roof was gone. Snow was pouring inside. The family was huddled in a corner trying to shelter from the elements that were now inside their home. Ingrid pounded on what remained of the door and entered. Peter and Anna looked at her with shock. Nobody should be outside in these conditions, but here was Ingrid Bergström, appearing like a ghost from the storm. "Your cabin is destroyed. You need to come to my place now. My cabin is stable. It can shelter you." "Ingrid, we can't travel in this wind. It will kill us." "It will kill you if you stay. This roof is failing more every minute. My cabin has earth protection. The wind can't damage it. Come now." Peter looked at his partially roofed cabin filling with snow and made the desperate choice. He and Anna bundled their 3 children in every blanket. Ingrid led them out into the blizzard. The journey back was even harder with 5 people. Ingrid went first, breaking trail and finding the way. Peter carried his youngest. Anna held another child. The oldest struggled beside them. They crawled, stumbled, fought the wind for nearly an hour, covering a quarter-mile. When they finally reached Ingrid's earth-bermed cabin, the contrast was shocking. Outside, 100-mile-per-hour wind, -32 degrees, deadly chaos. Inside Ingrid's cabin, silence, 56 degrees, complete protection. The Larsen family collapsed in warmth and safety while their own cabin was being destroyed. But Ingrid wasn't done. After getting the Larsens settled, she went back out into the blizzard. Sarah Mitchell's cabin was closer, quarter-mile in different direction. Ingrid found Sarah alone, terrified, in a cabin with both windows torn out, wind and snow pouring through the openings. The structure was no longer shelter. It was a death trap. "Sarah, you have to come with me. My cabin is protected." "Ingrid, I can't leave. The wind has already destroyed your cabin. Come now." Ingrid pulled Sarah out into the storm. The 2 women fought their way back to the earth-bermed cabin. When Sarah entered and felt the warmth and stability, she started crying from relief. The tiny cabin, just 120 square feet, now sheltered 7 people. It was crowded beyond belief. There was barely room to sit, but it was warm, 54 degrees even with increased occupancy, protected, stable. The earth berms that everyone had mocked were providing protection no conventional cabin could achieve. Peter Larsen stood in Ingrid's cramped, earth-bermed cabin, surrounded by his family plus 2 others, able to feel the silence despite knowing 100-mile-per-hour wind was outside, and tried to process what was happening. "Ingrid, I told you burying your cabin walls under earth was dangerous and insane. I said the earth would rot the logs or crush the structure, and instead, my cabin is being destroyed by wind, while yours stands like a fortress. You came out into lethal conditions to rescue us because your cabin was so stable you could leave it. The earth Berming I said would kill you actually made you the only person who could help anyone." The blizzard continued through February 5th, 48 hours of sustained high wind and extreme cold. Conventional cabins across the territory were damaged or destroyed. 17 cabins lost roofs partially or completely. Dozens had windows torn out. 3 structures collapsed entirely from wind force. Ingrid's earth-bermed cabin suffered 0 damage. The wind couldn't touch walls that were protected by tons of earth. The small exposed front wall, just 10 feet wide, was insufficient surface for wind to gain purchase. The structure was so stable that Ingrid made 2 more rescue trips during the blizzard, bringing 2 more people to her cabin when their structures failed. By the time the wind finally calmed on February 6th, 9 people were sheltered in Ingrid's 120-square-foot cabin. They rotated sleeping, took turns sitting, managed the impossible crowding, but everyone was safe and warm, while conventional cabins had been devastated. When people emerged to assess damage, the contrast was undeniable. Conventional cabins, roofs damaged or gone, windows torn out, structures compromised, extensive repairs needed. Ingrid's earth-bermed cabin, undamaged, stable, exactly as she'd left it before the storm. The survival statistics told the story. Across Dakota Territory, 11 people died in the blizzard, 8 from exposure when damaged cabins no longer provided shelter, 3 from hypothermia when wind-damaged structures couldn't maintain temperature. In Ingrid's earth-bermed cabin, 9 people sheltered, 0 deaths, minimal discomfort despite crowding. The structure that everyone said would collapse or flood had proven superior to conventional construction in both thermal and structural performance. Word spread rapidly. Ingrid Bergstrom's earth-bermed cabin, the one everyone mocked as buried and dangerous, had withstood 100-mile-per-hour wind without damage while conventional cabins were destroyed. And she'd rescued 9 people because her cabin was stable enough to leave and return to safely. People came to examine the earth-bermed structure. They saw the 3 walls buried under earth berms to roof level, the one exposed front wall, the intact construction showing 0 damage. They saw conventional cabins around the territory with torn roofs and missing windows, while Ingrid's cabin stood perfect. Peter Larson stood beside Ingrid's cabin, looking at the massive earth berms flanking the small front wall, and publicly acknowledged his error. I told Ingrid that piling earth against her cabin walls was structural suicide, that the earth would rot the logs or crush the structure. I was completely wrong. My cabin's roof was torn off by wind that couldn't touch Ingrid's bermed walls. She rescued my family from my failing conventional cabin and sheltered us in her earth-protected fortress. The earth berming I said was dangerous turned out to be the only construction method that actually worked when 100-mile-per-hour wind hit. Over the following months, 6 families approached Ingrid about earth berming techniques. Ingrid shared her knowledge freely. Tar paper waterproofing is critical, drainage must be planned carefully, wall construction must be strong enough to support earth weight. Berming works best on 3 walls, with 1 exposed for light and access. 3 families successfully built earth-bermed cabins, not all tiny like Ingrid's. Some were 12 by 16 or 14 by 18, but all used 3-wall berming for protection. The technique spread across Dakota Territory as practical engineering that combined insulation efficiency with wind protection. The first successful adopter was Henrik Olsen, who built a 12 by 16 earth-bermed cabin in fall 1884. Henrik followed Ingrid's techniques precisely: tar paper waterproofing, rock drainage channels, gradual earth packing, sod planting on berms. His cabin performed excellently through winter 1884-85, using approximately 1/4 the firewood of his previous conventional cabin, while maintaining warmer interior temperature. The second was Martha Hendricks, a widow similar situation to Ingrid. Martha built a 10 by 14 earth-bermed cabin using Ingrid's design principles. Martha reported the construction was labor-intensive, but she could accomplish it alone over 1 summer, and the material cost was just $42, half what a conventional cabin would have required. The third was the Peterson family, who built a larger 14 by 18 earth-bermed cabin. They modified the design slightly. Instead of 3 fully bermed walls, they bermed the back wall and half of each side wall, leaving more exposed wall surface for additional windows. Their hybrid approach still provided significant insulation while increasing light. They reported fuel savings of approximately 40% compared to their previous conventional cabin. Not everyone who attempted earth berming succeeded. The Jensen family tried to build an earth-bermed cabin, but skipped the tar paper waterproofing to save money. Within 2 months, moisture had penetrated their walls, and rot began. They had to excavate the earth, repair the logs, and properly waterproof before re-berming, learning the hard way that Ingrid's methods couldn't be shortcut. The Thompson family attempted earth berming, but failed to install proper drainage. During spring melt, water pooled at their foundation level and flooded into the cabin. They had to excavate, install the drainage channels Ingrid had specified, and re-berm. Again, the lesson was clear. Earth berming works excellently when done properly, fails catastrophically when techniques are ignored. By 1886, earth berming had gained enough acceptance in Dakota Territory that agricultural extension publications began documenting the technique. A publication from Dakota Agricultural College in 1887 included diagrams of earth-bermed construction, credited Ingrid Bergstrom as the pioneer who had proven the method's effectiveness, and recommended the technique for settlers with limited timber resources. The economic analysis in the publication was compelling. Conventional 12 by 16 log cabin required approximately 90 logs at $1.50 each, hauled from distant timber, plus $45 in additional materials, $180 total. Earth-bermed 12 by 16 cabin required approximately 50 logs, only one full wall plus partial side walls, at $150 each, plus $50 in tar paper, boards, etc. Paras, $125 total. The earth berming saved $55 in construction costs while improving thermal performance and wind resistance. Fuel cost analysis was even more favorable. The publication estimated conventional cabins consumed 4 to 6 cords of firewood per winter, $20–30 cost if purchased. Earth-bermed cabins consumed 1 to 2 cords per winter, $5 to $10 cost. Over a 5-year period, the fuel savings from earth berming, $75–100, exceeded the already lower initial construction cost. The publication also addressed the moisture concerns that had been primary criticism of earth berming. Testing of tar-papered logs after 2 years showed 0 moisture penetration and 0 rot when proper waterproofing and drainage were used. The fears about earth causing log rot were proven unfounded when technique was properly applied. The economic impact was significant. Ingrid calculated her cabin cost just $38 in materials. The earth was free, just labor-intensive. Conventional cabins cost $100 to $150 for materials alone. Earth berming dramatically reduced cost while improving performance. Maintenance was also minimal. Conventional cabins needed regular roof repairs, exterior chinking maintenance, weatherproofing upkeep. Ingrid's bermed walls required no maintenance. Earth doesn't rot, doesn't need painting, doesn't deteriorate. Only the exposed front wall needed normal upkeep. Fuel efficiency remained exceptional. Through subsequent winters, Ingrid used approximately 1/5 the firewood of conventional cabins. 3 bermed walls meant minimal heat loss. Only the exposed front wall conducted temperature. The earth mass provided passive insulation that required 0 maintenance and never degraded. Some people never accepted earth berming as proper construction. They insisted 4-wall exposed cabins were civilized regardless of performance. But for people who'd lost their roofs to 100-mile-per-hour wind, or who'd spent subsequent winters burning massive firewood trying to heat leaky conventional cabins, Ingrid's approach represented practical engineering that transcended conventional thinking. What Ingrid had demonstrated was a principle later formalized in earth-sheltered architecture. Earth mass provides both thermal insulation and structural wind protection. Modern earth-bermed homes use these same concepts, partial berming for insulation while maintaining light access through exposed walls. Ingrid lived in her earth-bermed cabin for 11 years until 1894, when she married and built a larger home, which she also earth-bermed on 3 walls, applying lessons learned. Her original tiny cabin stood until 1919, 36 years, before being finally dismantled. The tar-papered logs beneath the earth remained perfectly preserved, showing 0 rot or moisture damage after decades. A photograph from 1892 shows Ingrid standing beside her earth-bermed cabin, with the distinctive earth mounds flanking the small front wall clearly visible. The structure looks like a grassy hill, with a cabin front emerging from it, proportions that seem wrong until you understand the physics and engineering that make them superior. And a letter from Sarah Mitchell in 1886 described the February 1884 blizzard. Was trapped in my conventional cabin when 100-mile-per-hour wind tore my windows out, exposing me to deadly conditions. Ingrid Bergström came out of her earth-bermed cabin into lethal wind to rescue me. She could leave her shelter safely because it was so stable and protected. The cabin I'd said looked like a grave proved to be the only structure that could withstand the storm. The earth-berming I called dangerous was actually the engineering that saved 9 lives, including mine. Sometimes what looks buried and primitive is actually advanced and superior when extreme conditions test everything. Ingrid Bergström built a tiny cabin with 3 walls buried under earth berms to roof level, when everyone laughed at her buried structure and said earth would rot logs, crush the cabin, or flood the interior. They mocked the earth-berming as dangerous, unhealthy, and uncivilized, building a grave to live in rather than proper exposed housing. Then the blizzard came with 100-mile-per-hour wind that destroyed conventional cabins, tearing roofs off, ripping windows out, collapsing structures, while earth-bermed walls stood protected by tons of earth mass that absorbed wind force. Ingrid's cabin was so stable she could leave it to rescue 9 neighbors from their failing conventional structures, bringing them back to shelter that worked when normal construction failed catastrophically. The earth everyone said would crush, the cabin actually protected it. The berming everyone called a death trap actually created the only safe structure within miles. The tiny size everyone mocked as inadequate sheltered 9 people because it was so efficiently insulated by free earth. Ingrid didn't invent earth-berming. Indigenous peoples and European builders had used variations for centuries, but she applied Swedish earth insulation knowledge to American log construction, creating hybrid technique that combined thermal efficiency with structural wind protection. The earth-bermed cabin stood for 36 years. And when finally dismantled, the tar-papered logs beneath the earth showed 0 rot. Proof that proper waterproofing and drainage made earth-berming not just effective, but durable for decades. Sometimes the structure that looks most buried and least civilized is actually the most protected and most advanced, when physics and engineering matter more than conventional appearance.